We'll start this meeting this morning with a presentation uh, regarding the lynching of Mr. Rubin Stacy. This is something that was done by a commissioner from Parkland. So if staff's ready, would you go ahead and play that video, please?
Mr. Mayor, members of the Broward County Commission, my name is Ken Cutler, and I am a resident of Parkland, and I was born and raised in Broward County, Florida. The mayor has asked me to come to you today to talk to you about the history of Rubin Stacy, and this will be my presentation on that. This is the Broward County lynching of Rubin Stacy on July 19, 1935. The research and information is gathered by myself, Ken Cutler. According to news reports, on July 16, 1935, an unidentified black man knocked on the door of the home of Marion Jones of Fort Lauderdale and asked for a drink of water. When she let him in, he threatened her with a small knife. She screamed and fought him off until her 5-year-old son, Jimmy Jones, ran for help next door. On July 18th, Rubin, aka Gruff Stacy, had been seen hiding in the bushes by the road by a passing driver and reported as suspicious looking after news of the attack of Jones got out to the public. Mr. Stacy was arrested by Constable W.D. Dugald of Deerfield Beach. The arrest took place after a foot chase in which Mr. Stacy fled while being shot at by Officer Dugald. Mr. Stacy was considered guilty because he had run from a constable. He was arrested and turned over to Sheriff Walter Clark of the Broward County Sheriff's Department. Mr. Stacy denied having attacked Marion Jones. On July 19th, rather than use a police lineup, Sheriff Clark and the constable took Rubin Stacy to the home of Marion Hill Jones. This caused a chaotic scene where her children ran around screaming, "There he is." Jones positively identified Mr. Stacy as her attacker. She received a $25 reward for identifying him as the attacker. So did each of the deputies who brought him to her house to be identified. Mr. Stacy was taken back to the Broward County Jail. There are a couple of different versions of what happened next, and according to Sheriff Clark, who is pictured here, rumors had spread incorrectly that Jones had been raped. Sheriff Clark said he felt there were signs of a rising lynching spirit, including locals watching the jail. Clark was worried about the adequacy of the small Broward County Jail. So he consulted with his deputies and the state attorney at the time, a man by the name of Louis Marr, about moving Mr. Stacy to the Dade County Jail. This is a picture of Mr. Marr. Marr declined to contact Governor Schultz at the time to ask for help and instead suggested that they confer with Judge George W. Tedder, who agreed with the plan to move Mr. Stacy. Deputies Virgil Wright, who is pictured here, and Bob Clark, the sheriff's brother, were involved in moving Mr. Stacy. This is also a picture of Judge Tedder. The car Mr. Stacy was being transported in was quickly followed and run off the road after a high-speed chase, according to the sheriff. Mr. Stacy was removed from the deputy's car and taken by a group of local men to a place close to the Jones home. There, according to the sheriff, he was shot and hung from a tree by the men who had taken him from the car. Word of the lynching quickly spread and investigations into what happened followed. On July 23, 1935, a Broward County grand jury was convened and a one-day inquiry was done with 29 witnesses being called. All 5 officers that accompanied Mr. Stacy testified that they did not know any of the lynch mob members, saying that they all wore masks. The grand jury made no indictments and no arrests. Marr apparently believed that there was a leak concerning the sheriff's plan to move Mr. Stacy to Dade County, but he was unable to prove it. Later accounts, news reports, and eyewitness recollections have suggested that the sheriff's version was manufactured because of his own involvement in the lynching and suggests that he coerced those attending the scene to shoot his gun at the victim. Whatever the truth might be, Rubin Stacy died without a trial, without evidence, and without justice at the hands of a mob. The Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama has established the National Memorial for Peace and Justice to commemorate the fact that more than 4,400 African American men, women, and children were hanged, burned alive, shot, drowned, and beaten to death by white mobs between 1877 and 1950. Millions more fled the South as refugees from racial terrorism, profoundly impacting the entire nation. Until now, there have been no national memorial acknowledging the victims of racial terror lynchings. On a 6-acre site atop a rise overlooking Montgomery, the National Lynching Memorial is a sacred space for truth-telling and reflection about racial terror in America and its legacy. As part of an effort to stabilize our community, address racial inequality and injustice, and open a meaningful dialogue for facing a truth that is dividing our country, I am suggesting that Broward County engages in a community remembrance project in conjunction with the EJI's campaign to recognize the victims of lynching by collecting soil from lynching sites, erecting historical markers, and creating a national memorial that acknowledges the horrors of racial injustice. I am asking you to support this meaningful project, and it starts with recognizing the death of Rubin Stacy. Thank you very much.
So today, this next week, the 19th, would make, I believe, 85 years since this occurred. And today, I'm going to read a proclamation which we will present to the NAAC President, Ms. Alicia Allison, who is listening in. And Ms. Allison is not able to come in. But I'll take this over to the office, Madam President, and give it to you, present it to you. So the proclamation reads, whereas demonstrations and protests happening across the nation and the world, with individuals from all walks of life marching in solidarity, asking for police reform and racial equity. Racism is ingrained in our history and profoundly embedded in our institutions. Learning the history of racism in the community and country and talking about structural racism and racial bias is crucial to eliminating continuation of the great inequities that exist. And whereas truth and reconciliation is important in our efforts to build a better community and a stronger nation, today we take this step to acknowledge a great tragedy that happened here in Broward County in 1935. And whereas on July 19th, 1935, Rubin Stacy, whose name appears in some accounts as Rubin Stacy, a tenant farmer, knocked on the door of the home of Marion Jones of Fort Lauderdale and asked for a drink of water. He was accused of threatening her with a small knife. And whereas Mr. Stacy was arrested, while being transported to Dade County Jail, the car was run off the road after a high-speed chase by a mob. Mr. Stacy was removed and taken to a place close to the Jones home. And whereas Mr. Stacy was lynched by the mob, according to the sheriff, the 5 officers that accompanied Mr. Stacy testified that they did not know any of the people who lynched him since they wore masks. The grand jury made no indictment and no arrest. And whereas Broward County joins the community to overcome racial injustice and is creating a racial equity task force to develop a countywide action plan with solutions that can be implemented. And whereas to work toward this goal, it is important to learn how racism affects education, law enforcement, criminal justice, employment, and other parts of the community. And whereas the goal of racial equity in Broward County is to eliminate racial disparities, Broward County seeks to partner with community coalitions, which will include diverse individual representation, representing the local community, local organizations and institutions to build local awareness and enable truthful conversation about the legacy of racial terrorism and injustice. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Broward County, Florida,
that the board hereby designates Sunday, July 19, 2020 as Rubin Stacy Remembrance Day in Broward County, Florida.